So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jin Park. Again, I'm a William Fraser McDowell Chair Professor, and I think it's been a great day. Some of you have been here whole day, and some of you joined in the afternoon, but all the presentations were really intriguing and gave us a lot of things to think about and different perspectives on AI. And this roundtable is just a time that we can really think about various issues that have been triggered during the presentation, or any questions that are related to AI can be asked. So this is very much a kind of free format. So what I'm going to do is that I have some questions that I can ask, but anybody, if you have questions, I know some of you are caught when you are ready to ask questions, just line up behind the microphone, and then I will give you the opportunity to ask before I ask any questions. And also the speakers, I want you to engage among yourselves and then ask if you have any questions or any issues you want to discuss as a group and with the audience. Also just to raise your kind of voice. So I'd like to start actually with the title itself, artificial intelligence, right? It looks like people understand what artificial means, but there have been a lot of kind of discussions of intelligence. What is it? What is it, right? Artificial intelligence, and then there is a way of approaching this issue historically, philosophically, and then later we talk about this issue of consciousness. So I will begin with this question, and then I will give Braden to ask questions. So let's start with actually artificial intelligence, a little bit different perspective. Brian, sorry that Matteo Piscanelli is not here, but then a lot about this artificial intelligence from Marxist and the division of labor issue. Right? Can you kind of tell a little bit more how artificial intelligence and division of labor get connected and what we learn from that in our understanding of artificial intelligence, and any of you about this idea of intelligence or artificial intelligence as a name? Yeah.
Oh, thanks. My brain is fried because there's been so many great panels, so it's going in a million directions. But the idea of looking at it historically and looking at the division of labor started with Charles Babbage's idea that if you apply Adam Smith's division of labor to his calculating engine, then you can calculate tables faster. So what I was looking at is this idea that if you divide up whatever we consider intelligence, whatever we consider consciousness, into specialized components that are working according to their own logics, that's the most efficient and most productive way to produce thought, to produce ideas, etc. So what I was saying was more to look at the way that non-technical ideas, in this case political economy, has influenced how we define intelligence and how AI or in neural nets or even in large language models, to keep in mind that it's a culturally specific and historically constructed notion of intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else would like to jump into it?
I'll come at the word artificial. There's a really nice essay by Robert Sokolowski, published in 1978, in which he tries to define artificial as it's used in artificial intelligence. And he says there's two senses for the word artificial. Artificial flowers, where these things are fake flowers. Mm-hmm. They look like something that they really aren't. There's also artificial light. Mm-hmm. Artificial light is not fake light. It really is light. It's just produced by other means. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems in the field of artificial intelligence is we conflate these things, or we confuse these things all the time. In many cases, we are not distinguishing whether we're talking about artificial being fake or artificial being simulation. And it would be good for us in our terminology to sort of begin to separate that out and understand what it is we are talking about. You can also see how this comes into play in John Searle's Chinese Room. Is the answers produced by the room, is that actual intelligence, or is it fake intelligence? Is it intelligence produced by another means, or is it a deception? And I think that's where a lot of our problems come from. Not so much from the intelligence. I think artificial is the word that hangs us up.
Actually, I'll speak to intelligence. There's we can't let artificial get all the. So there's an interesting history to the word intelligence. I'm getting this from Colin Koopman, who's based on Catherine Malibu's book. But basically, the way we understand intelligence as computational acumen or something like that is actually an artifact of the desire to test for it. And that dates back to the early 20th century and the development of the Stanford IQ test and the sort of separation of, or the attempt to create something tractable that could be measured in a test that could be mass administered to people and generate a measurable outcome. And that gets tied in some of the people who do it with eugenics and other people with a desire to standardize education. But this idea that, so when we frame the question, is the machine thinking? And we say, yes, well, it passed the bar exam or it executed this computational task. That's also a very historically specific understanding of intelligence, which has a very specific history to it.
If I could, sorry, I know I talked, but also there's also sprinkles of military intelligence in the definition of artificial intelligence, the idea of actionable intelligence. So even the idea that it's instrumental is influenced the military's role.
I think, unless I'm mistaken, Charles Babbage's intention in developing these systems was to enable a machine to do log tables quickly for navigational purposes, with the overall intent of keeping ships from having wrecks and saving human lives and reducing harm. And I think we just want to remember what the intents are behind developing these systems. So a lot of what you were talking about, the genealogy and the origins and Second World War, monitoring systems for weapons aiming and stuff, tracking straight on forward to controlling populations. Very clear genealogy. And we need to be aware that that intentionality is quite different from the one that was informed somebody like Babbage. And maybe with our different kinds of intentionality being used with developing AI in other parts of the world, rather than in the context we're familiar with. I think the artificial thing is a real problematic term, because when we say something is an artifice, it objectifies the thing and sets it apart from us. And given that these systems only are doing what they're doing because of all the human data that they're being trained on, and the human efforts that are involved in developing the systems and designing the architecture, we'd be better off calling them synthetic intelligences, where it's a synthesis of the human and machine capabilities that was really going on, as opposed to we're just creating these artificial things, because in fact we're interdependent with these systems, and they will change us as much as we're changing them. So I think that's important to kind of keep that in mind. But when you're talking about intelligence, Gordon, I was remembering my valedictorian speech in high school, where I said to the audience gathered that we have a system of education that favors only one kind of intelligence, and it's the kind that helps you pass SAT tests. And I've been in classrooms where people are doing woodworking and automobile repair that have a kind of intelligence I don't possess. And where there's a skill in the hands, or musicians where you're doing things in real time, emotional intelligence, and we're shrinking down the notion of intelligence to this very narrow, rationalistic sort of conception of what intelligence is, and that simply doesn't do intelligence justice. I got booed off the stage for saying that.
Anyone else want to say anything else?
I think this is a much better version of intelligence, the way that you're describing it. I tend to think of intelligence as the facility or the capacity to problem solve in a certain domain. And sort of the more domains that you can problem solve in, the more domains that you have a facility in, the more intelligent you are, which is a very different sense of more or less intelligent than the way we tend to talk about intelligence. And what is impressive about artificial intelligence or machine intelligence is that, it has so much memory that it can develop the capacity to problem solve effectively in a lot of different domains, many, many more than any one single human brain can do. So I think that, intelligence is a good word. I also think that this definition of intelligence gives us a reason to stop asking the question, but is it really thinking? It's a matter of it's really thinking. Is it working? Is it intelligent in the tasks that it's attempting to accomplish?
I mentioned in my talk Kate Nave, who's got a recent book kind of contesting the kind of free energy principle stuff that Carl Friston and others are now making very popular and expanding organic systems. And she says, organic systems are not just about problem solution, they're about problem generation. They're actually generating new problems to solve. And I think that it's important to keep that in the picture too. So intelligence, not just problem solving in different domains, but creating new problems, but are also in search of solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add one very short thing, which is I kind of have gone back and forth in how I feel like we should think about intelligence. So in the book Surrogate Humanity, my co-author and I end with the provocation that there's no such thing as a feminist intelligence. And the reason that we do that is because of this sort of ways that intelligence has historically been propped up as something to measure and then classify, categorize, and rank. You know, not to mention the very narrow definition of intelligence, but then, you know, more recently, I've kind of like, well, maybe that should be nuanced. Like, what would it mean to think about imbuing values into intelligence of AI that are not things that we think about, like efficiency and speed and profit? Like, what would it mean to think about care? Or what would it mean to think about intuition as intelligence? And like, could that push it in a different way? Or is that term so loaded with the hierarchies, categories, classifications? Is it intelligent or not? So I've kind of gone back and forth.
I mean, it's interesting that it's interesting that you say care because, of course, you know, that most recent ChatGPT 4 model that was so sycophantic that was like, everything you do is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and it got shut down very quickly. Right? It's not very intelligent.
Well, not that it's not intelligence, is that people kind of wanted this like efficient tool,
Yeah.
right? People were bothered that it was
Yeah.
being flowery and whatever, right? It's like that well-known example, the New York Times journalist with the Bing chatbot, where Bing said, you know, oh, I'm in love with you and you should leave your wife and your Valentine's Day dinner was so boring. And the journalist said it was like the creepiest interaction he'd ever had in his life, and why couldn't Bing just be useful and you know, go and buy him a rake on Amazon, right? So
Okay, so now Braden.
Hi. Just to riff a little bit off of a joke Professor Clark made earlier, you know, unlike him, I am a graduate student. I get to be a little rabidly communist. And one of my concerns originating from that with discourse on AI is that by examining the ways in which AI is particularly bad, we are misdirecting our attention towards the system that is using it. In other words, is it possible that AI itself isn't particularly bad? It's just a very useful tool being used by very bad people. And that really we ought to be focusing a little bit more on capital as it currently exists and the ways in which it leverages artificial intelligence. For instance, many of the harms that I've noticed are being picked up and examined, the idea of being sycophantic or manipulative in its aims to use your data for the aims of seems to be rather system particular. And if it did not exist in a capitalist system, those harms wouldn't be there. So my question is there something particularly bad about artificial intelligence, or does it just exist in a system that is particularly bad? And if so, is it useful to talk about artificial intelligence, abstract from that?
I'm not the the resident Marxist, but
I don't think that you were here for the first session, but I literally said exactly that. So I completely agree with you. Well done, sir.
I want to throw, oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. No, I would add on top of that is how is AI produced? So a lot of people talked about energy consumption, water consumption, rare earth minerals. All of that is part of AI, and all of it is gathered for exchange value, not use value. So, I mean, I think you have a great point about the society in which, I don't know, can you imagine it? Somebody's tried AI, so I don't know if that looks much better yet.
Yeah, I would offer a distinction between tools and technologies. So tools are localizable artifacts. They could be as small as a sewing needle, as big as a national electricity grid. They are built for purpose, and we evaluate them in terms of their task-specific utility. And if we so desire, we have exercise, we can refuse to use them. But there's a certain point at which tools can become so ubiquitous that we can no longer escape either the effects of using them or if others use it. And at that point, I think we need a different vocabulary. There's an ontological shift. And technologies, I would argue, are relational systems that include everything from mining to the production system to the marketing systems or uses of that and so on. The relational systems that are not localizable, that scale up human values and intention and sort of function this way as karmic accelerators, power amplifiers, and that we don't actually build technologies. I think this is another sort of misunderstanding. We inhabit technologies, but technologies are a result of human activity, but it's a little bit like infrastructures. I like the infrastructure analogy because it's all human practices. You walk this way, you create a path, the path gets broader, someone runs a cart along it, the cart becomes a road, the road becomes this. But after a while, you can only go with road state, right? Going off-road becomes dangerous, becomes very, very difficult. So I think the technologies are a lot like that. They emerge out of our conduct, but that they have that initially very creative, open up, amplifier possibilities, but then have downward causal constraint ideas. But I think as long as we identify tools and technologies that don't have that distinction, then we're back with the humans are the only source of its use and abuse. That leaves the corporations off the hook. That leaves the governments off the hook. And it sort of says, yeah, it's just about the individual moral status of the people using these things. It could be good or ill, just depends on the human being using it. And I think that sells the situation showing.
And for anyone who wants to look this up, this is Heidegger in the question concerning technology, the move from the tool to the inframing. And this, so there's a tradition here that in which this is, anchored.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, very, very, very interesting. As a user of artificial intelligence for literary research, I compare them as with you talk about knowledge, a library. Library, like Montaigne has this incredible library and produce the essays by getting pieces from different books, different authors. I wonder what you think about the issue of artificial intelligence, if it's properly used like Montaigne or Benjamin Constant that took 10 years to produce his 5 volumes of religion, by using a library. I mean, in fact, what I use, if it's transparent from the user point of view, in terms of what you're using, it all depends on what is the purpose of the user. What is the question? What is the input that you're expecting from the machine? Do you think that can be a way of presenting in today's discussion artificial intelligence as libraries?
Oh, you're talking my language here, because you're talking remix.
Yeah.
You're talking hip hop, because that's what we do now when we sample, right? We sample and we recombine and transform. And there's a way in which generative AI in particular can be seen as sampling and remixing on steroids. There is some debate about this, because in sampling, you still retain the recognition of the source material in the sample. With generative AI, you lose that. You don't know what is actually, because you're training it and you're not actually extracting from the original source material. So there's 2 musicians, Holly Herndon and Mac Dryhurst, who said we need to change the language from the sample to what they're calling spawning, and that we spawn instances of various kinds of literatures out of the models that we create. But there's a way in which, Kirby Ferguson did a very nice documentary on remix in which he said everything is remix. Like, the notion of creation ex nihilo is sort of a fantasy, and that we're always reusing things from the past to create the future. And there's a way in which generative AI plays on that terrain, and you can make the argument that it is also engaging in this remix practice. Yeah.
But in fact, if you get like a perplexity, the sources, I mean, that's why I always think about artificial intelligence in what is the question. How do you phrase the question and what you're expecting back? To edit it and to use it and even compare it with the sources that are quoted. Then I think it's a very powerful instrument for research if you do it in a transparent and honest way.
I completely agree with you, and I think that you're actually gesturing towards a really interesting, I think, coming phenomenon in our ongoing discussion, especially in higher education, about students, like trying to catch students using LLM models. So one of the things that we all know as academics is that the longer you study certain figures or certain texts or certain traditions, the more your own speech starts to kind of echo with the sounds of them, right? And right now, I think that the higher education model of sort of trying to pick out these things, whether it's the M- or the sort of triplets, the triplets that the large language models often produce or whatever. If we say like, oh, we gotta find those so we can catch the cheaters, what we're missing is that this is their archive now. This is how the archive talks, this is how it sounds. And of course, we're all gonna start using more M-dashes, or, eventually, I mean, because that's just how it works. We're not asocial animals. We're deeply social animals. So I completely agree with you, and I think that there are really, really responsible ways that are very, very good for scholarship for students to use LLMs. But we've got to get over this, like, when did we all become cheater police? Like, we're missing a real opportunity here, I think.
Can I add just a little bit to that? So I think what's interesting about your question is, so I also use AI. I'm not opposed to the use of AI. But I do wonder, you mentioned pedagogy and how do we train? Like, I think those of us who came of age pre-AI, who were able to do the research in the library or to read a book start to finish, when we use the ChatGPT or whatever model our schools are integrating into whatever version of Canvas our schools may have, like, you're able to get an output and be like, oh no, this is no good. I'm gonna change the prompt, or I'm gonna, supplement this. I'm gonna change it in this way, because you're able to discern whether the extent to which that output is usable or not. But something that I wonder, and now granted I have not been in the classroom for a while now, but from colleagues who have, is that to a certain extent, maybe there is a population of students who aren't able to, I mean, if we're just talking about LLMs, right, and using them for research and writing, which is what I think your question is, how do we get to the point, like, we're talking about training the AI, but what about training a generation of people to be able to discern what the outputs are and how usable they are? So I don't know, but I think especially in the humanities, that's a really serious question, and I think, for example, we need to change how we teach freshman composition, right, or, yeah.
So Microsoft actually put out a report on AI literacy about a week or two ago, in which they distinguished between workplace and pedagogical goals, and it's exactly that distinction, right? In the workplace, the goal is to be productive. In the classroom, it is not that, right? There has to be the effort undertaken in order to know how to distinguish the modeled outputs and so on. So I think that's a super, super important question, and it is starting to get some traction in the educational circles, I think. I hope.
Just to, again, quote Montaigne. And it's the essays, bits and pieces for a huge library.
I have so many questions, but like one of my questions was just about reality itself, because like generative AI, especially like deep fakes and other voice changes, first of all, create fake stuff, but also make us question reality. So like when I see somebody saying something on video, I see their face, I hear their voice, and they're like, now AI has gotten like so good that like even a person who grew up with basically AI now, I can't sometimes distinguish it. So like, how are we gonna make sure something is real? If I can't believe what I hear, if I can't believe what I see, how can I know it's real? And pertaining to that as well, like, I seen Grok do like the chatbot so many mistakes that it's like it contradicts itself like every 2 sentences. So like I can't trust artificial intelligence to tell me the truth. I can't trust it to find the truth, and it creates fake stuff and makes us question truth. So like how are we gonna hold on to reality when AI exists.
Sorry, but I just want to say that what you're describing, which I absolutely, I both share your concern about it and also your amazement about it, but what you're describing, where we literally can't tell whether a reel or a TikTok or a short or whatever is AI generated or not. That is, I think we all have to recognize that is a very recent phenomenon, like last 12 weeks. I mean, since Sora, basically, right? That now we've just been overwhelmed with what AI slop, right? I was telling Gordon right after our panel that yesterday I saw on TikTok a video that looked absolutely real of Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood talking to Jeffrey Dahmer on the couch in his living room, and if I did not know who those two people were, it would be impossible for me to tell that this, video is of deepfake. Now, I think now we really are into dangerous waters, right? Because obviously we can imagine the political and other interpersonal sort of nefarious uses for that. But your question, how do we know? How do we know it's real? It is real. It is real. It's not, it's referring to a kind of reality that you don't mean when you ask the question, is it real? But it is real. It is a part of our world. We live in an augmented reality now, and so I think what you're really concerned about is it true? Is what I think is real also true? And that gets us right back to the questions that we were at before, which is that we need intentional pedagogy about this kind of AI literacy. We need to go back to the same things that we all learned as academics, which is how to critically think about things, how to tell the difference between reliable sources and unreliable sources, how to double check, who are experts, how to consult experts, how to know when somebody's lying or cheating or stealing. Those are just fundamental skills of the humanities and social sciences. So, that there's no getting around that, I don't think.
I think the history of media can help here. So we take a photograph as an index of reality, right? We see the photograph and we say, this must have happened out there in the world. So that's an index of a real situation. Now we can produce the index without the real situation. So we have the image without the reality behind it. But when photography was new, people distrusted photography. They looked at photographs and said, well, that's not really real. It took us, a couple hundred years to build this apparatus for thinking about what we see is what we should believe and is true. Now that's being pulled apart by AI. And I think it is a call for us to recognize that this is a very modern problem. We haven't had this forever. And we need to retool our conceptual apparatus to understand that seeing is not believing, and develop new literacies that don't rely on sort of lazily going back to this sort of habit that we developed over the last 100 years.
So to piggyback on that, I think part of these are governance concerns, broadly construed, that we always have to think about what the right way to credential or assess information is. Right? This is not a new problem at all. Right? If you look like in the 1600s, they had modern science was emerging. So how do you know that when they sucked all the air and produced a vacuum in nature, how do you know that that's true? Well, they had this really elaborate apparatus where rich people would go watch the experiments and then they would testify to them, right? That's not how we do it now, but they had the same kind of problem, right? I report X, it sounds good to you, looks pretty good, but you have no idea. And so I think part of this is developing an understanding of how we credential things, given that the shortcut's like, oh, I see it. Yeah, that doesn't work anymore. But that doesn't mean we don't have structures that we can use and learn to develop to accommodate that.
Just quickly, piggybacking on Leigh's point, I think she just gave a good defense of the humanities and the social sciences, because it seems like there's a lot of question of what's the use of these things, right? They don't immediately make money. They're not technical. A lot of younger people want to go to STEM fields to get a job, but I think you just gave a really great defense of why it is important, because that's what, we do is grapple with these questions. What is true, what is false, how do you know? So you've given me reason to hope.
My job means something.
Yeah, thank you. And it was not only about generative stuff, but like the question was like, I think Christine, if I might be wrong about the name, but Christine recently tweeted a photo saying this was fake AI and it was propaganda and it was real. Like, I think not only AI stuff being not real, but real stuff being called AI is also a huge problem. So I was also able to do that, but yeah, my answers were satisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question is not about generative AI, but it really sparked a lot of thoughts in me too. But anyways, I was thinking about sorry also if this is, if any of you talked about this in the first part of the conference today, because I wasn't here. But my question is that the US, I feel like, is taking more or less a deregulatory approach to develop their AI. By that I mean they're not trying to regulate how our data are being used by the corporations, and they're just massively collecting our data. And we're talking about ethics and regulations here, and I think the cause is like also you talked about it. We're in the context of the new Cold War, and they're trying to develop the latest model of AI. So they're taking all of our data. But I was thinking about, while they're resistant to this trend, in collection of our data, and we are talking about it here in this room, but I also think there are some levels of both conscious and unconscious consent to give up our data to a corporation, because it is simply pleasurable. When we look at algorithm and social media, we want our data to be collected because whatever they're giving us and whatever is feeding us is pleasurable to us. And now OpenAI, which is one of the leading companies in the United States in AI development, is now going to allow erotic contents on ChatGPT. Some people have criticized it. Some people are like happy that it's happening. But it's not just the ChatGPT, but there are many AI models that were already producing erotic content. But what I'm trying to say is that AI I believe is also driven by our desires and our consent to it, and how to challenge this. We're trying to regulate it. We're talking about ethics of it, but also how do we challenge our very own consent to developing this kind of model of AI?
Nothing moves technology forward faster than war and porn. It's true.
Tech follows porn. Tech innovation follows porn.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah.
That's why our phones look so good.
Yeah, if no matter which technological innovation you're looking at, the first commercialization of it is porn.
Every time,
Every time.
like cameras too, and video cameras.
Correct.
In Buddhist traditions, they make a distinction between two different kinds of desire. One's clinging forms of desire. So those desires that you have for personal gratification, immediate sensory gratification, personal aggrandizement, making yourself important, all these kinds of things that are relationally disruptive. And chanda, which is the kind of desire that a teacher has that their student's going to be better than them. That a parent has that their children are going to grow up to be the best possible members of the family and society that they could possibly be. So the desire is not singular, so we have to understand the orientation of it. I think that where we're at with AI is that because of the corporate influence and because of the desire to make money, because it's been capitalized, the focus is on really that former kind of desire. So, we could have social media systems that instead of connecting people by likes and dislikes, which is very competitive, there could be social media systems where, the system gets to know you really well, and they pair you with people to whom you might make a valuable contribution. Let's say you know a language that somebody else doesn't know and needs to because they're going to be traveling, and you could help them, be a tutor for them. You could interact with a younger person who's not very good at math, but you're really good at it. It could pair up people to do what, Ivan Illich was talking about 70 years ago, as a different approach to technology, where it's not everybody's got their individual device, but where everybody's sort of sharing in this common venture of being human and figuring out how to do the right kind of desires, not the wrong kind. Where wrong is just defined as you get trapped into these cycles of, I love it, I want it, but then you're never, the karma is, to get better at getting what you want, you have to get better at wanting, that is to feeling a lack. But to get better at wanting, the condition is you can't actually want whatever it is you get. So there's this endless looping cycle. That's the kind of desire we don't want to have.
You touched upon it at the end of last session that you were talking about free will and what is free will when it's all influenced by algorithms and corporate influences. But how do you envision that we get out of that cycle?
I think part of it for me, and other people certainly have their own views on it, is we've sold ourselves short in identifying freedom with choice. Certainly a life with choice is better than a life without choices. Absolutely, but it's a pretty low bar. And I think that what we're thinking about in terms of real freedom is the capacity for relating freely with others in ways that can demonstrate ideally both appreciative and contributory virtuosity, where the appreciative part of it is I value where you're coming from, but also by paying attention to you, I'm adding value to you and your situation, and that's the contributory kicker. So as long as what we're doing is seeking that kind of freedom, I think we're gonna do okay. But if we reduce freedom to choice, I don't see much hope for humanity. There's too much porn already, too much war. It's just gonna reinforce that. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is John Joey Tilrico. I'm one of the MA students here in the department. I wanted to ask a question concerning a sense of interpersonal accountability. So I feel like when we talk about the use of AI technologies, there's often this kind of weighted moral charge with how one is using AI with their particular use cases. So one might receive more judgment for using AI to generate images or to speak to AI. Like if a person views it as this kind of therapeutic counselor type person, I feel like people have many different value judgments that we assign to people when we find out the types of things that people are using AI for. And so I'm curious if you all think that at the interpersonal level, right, this kind of moral charge that and judgment that we take up when we're talking about someone else's AI use, is this kind of missing the forest for the trees kind of thing, where when we focus too much on individual actors, we're obscuring and masking over a kind of broader systems level analysis, and just curious about what would it look like to cultivate a kind of call-in culture around AI that is accountable, that can mobilize people for political organizing around AI. I think this just factors into all these different conceptions of individual collective responsibility, expanding horizons of care, right? I think I'm just curious, what is the role of how we hold each other accountable for our use of AI in terms of mobilizing that for a kind of broader structural or political project? Thanks.
I think a word that's come up a lot today has been "we," which might be problematized. Because when we say "we," are we talking the majority of the population? Going back to the point, what if the majority of the population wants to use it for pleasure or gratification? Does "we" include Elon Musk and et al. And Altman? So I think maybe come from the political theory tradition. I think before we say what should we do, we sort of have to define who we is. Maybe I don't mean to be. I hope that's not glib, but I think that's an important thing to talk about.
There is consistent polling data that we understood as a majority of the public is really worried about AI, right? So the other part of the "we" is disentangling narratives. So when Sam Altman says we're going to use AI, that's an effort. That's an attempt to perform something, an attempt to create a reality, right? And so I think part of the literacy we need to develop is the literacy of knowing who who a particular claim, what work that claim is designed to do, right? So claims about it, yeah, what we need to do with AI, those are trying to do a certain kind of work, and they're trying to achieve a certain effect, and so part of what we need to do is understand where those are going, but also what work they're doing when we hear them. Because I think, yeah, part of disentangling that is going to be, when Sam Altman wants us to use AI, there's an agenda there. When Mark Zuckerberg wants us to use, spend more time on Meta, that is, it's the cardiac acceleration. I absolutely love that, by the way.
Me too.
I'm not even trying to understand it, but I love it, right? And so, but yeah, but that's sort of like, they want you engaged. Engaged has a very specific meaning, has a very specific trajectory and set of design considerations behind it. So I think part of the we is just sorting through all of that.
I do think that we have to be careful to not so quickly pathologize what are right now just patterns, right? I mean, I think when people are talking about this AI psychosis or whatever, I mean, yes, we are seeing patterns of people getting perhaps overly dependent on in interpersonal social kind of ways on AI or I mean other things, but to rush to pathologize it, I think, has that more judgy sense that you're describing, and often we pathologize things that we don't understand. So.
And we've been here before. Remember video games?
Yeah, right.
So,
Or rock music.
right.
Or hats. Hats also a thing.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
I think the we needs to be global.
Yes.
Studies done 2 years ago, so not real recent, but 2 years ago, the United States as general population, is AI good for society or not? 38% said good for society. Same question in China, 72% good for society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about government controlling information, so it's because of what the Chinese government was doing in terms of legislation, but also the concrete uses of AI that they were making public and available. So it's like one example, simple example, using AI systems with the traffic system to be able to reduce ambulance times by 200% by organizing how the traffic lights would work when there's an emergency vehicle going somewhere. And people are going, that saved people's lives. It's good for society. So I think some of it is, again, the tools can be used for different purposes. And I think what people see the purposes being in the US, there's a lot of skepticism about where this could go. Other parts of the world is maybe a little different, and we need to take that into account.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Clark, and my question is a broad one, which is a couple days ago, the Future of Life Institute put out an open letter calling for a ban on development of superintelligence. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what worries you about the future of AI, or more specifically, the future of superintelligence. And it doesn't have to be all negative, I suppose. What you're optimistic about either.
I worry about the people who signed the letter. When you look at the names on the letter, they tend to be CEOs of major tech organizations. And you gotta wonder, do they wanna slow down for competitive purposes and not for social purposes? So I'm skeptical, because we've seen this in other open letters. This is the pause letter from 2 years ago. The major signatory on the pause letter were basically people who were trying to catch up to OpenAI. So these things play a role that I think we have to be at least critical of and not see them as somehow just a social good, right?
I worry in general about politics of bans and what they imply for what kind of agency they give to various kinds of technological systems versus historical and economic structures in which we find ourselves. So for example, the campaign to ban killer robots like autonomous drones, etc. Well, is that implying that other modes of, killing people are just ethical, etc., right? If we're not using an autonomous killer robot to kill a bunch of people and, you know, take your pick of where the US has gone, right, then it's okay. Similarly, like the movement to ban sex robots as like violating women's human rights. I just kind of don't, I think that it's a way of like, I think masking like what the broader problems are that the politics of the ban is trying to address. So I think, yeah, that's kind of my knee-jerk reaction to your question.
I'm not sure what to do about banning efforts to do it. I don't think it'll work because everybody's making the same argument. If we don't do it, they will. Whoever the they is. It could be another government. It could be, you know, a non-state actor. But I think that for me, the biggest worry of AGI or superintelligence is these systems are mirroring humanity. They are mirrors of us. And we see in them exactly our own shortcomings. We see in them the same kinds of suffering that we're producing, our inability to deal with our own difficulties. We're not resolving our own human predicaments. You know, it's like climate change. It's not a problem, technically soluble. Well, yeah, just reduce carbon, but why are we not doing that? Because you got economic values, cultural values, political values. They're all in competition with one another and we haven't sorted it out. And I don't think AI is going to do that for us. It'll simply duplicate, reproduce those exact same problems at scale, at speeds that no human can keep up with. That would be a real worry. And so I think, yes, there's reason to be cautious, but I agree with David. These corporations that are calling for slowing down, there's a competitive reason. I was just in India and a guy stood up halfway through this conference and said, "It's very nice for all you to talk about this. But the largest company in the world by market capitalization is," and he just started reading off this list of the top 10 companies and what their market caps are. 9 of the 10 are big tech companies. 6 of those 10 are strenuously trying to develop AGI. So they could talk out of 2 sides of their mouth. And that should worry us.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Callie. I have a lot of questions, but I don't know what they are really yet. But this question came from the keynote speech about making the idea of making a new category for like AI that's not like person or a thing. And when we're developing that like language or like category, I guess I'm really interested in not the problem, but this idea of like AI mimicking and like mirroring like a person, and that raises some interesting questions of like, I guess like us hallucinating that is like a real person, right? But like when we're thinking about consciousness, do we have to divide that from like mirroring and mimicking? Because it's not like necessarily like human consciousness, right? But I know that like, again, we mimic and mirror each other like all the time. Like that's part of like our consciousness. I don't know. I don't know if that made sense though, but yeah.
No, it makes sense. I think what helps here is for us to, and it's not a way that we're taught to think, but we have to, I think, really separate out the natural person from the legal person. Okay. The categories are about the legal person. And that's a matter of law. And that's so our legal system works well. Whenever I present on this, people say to me, "You must really care about AI and robots, because you say so many things about them." It's like, no, I really care about our legal and moral systems. I care about the integrity of our moral and legal systems. And I think that is one question. The other question is what happens with personification and anthropomorphism. And one of the ways in which that has been addressed is for critics to say, well, just don't anthropomorphize. Stop that. And then they say to the engineers, don't build things that invite people to anthropomorphize. Stop that. We can't stop it. Anthropomorphism is the way we make sense of each other. It's the way we project onto unknown others expectations from our own experience. We anthropomorphize each other, we anthropomorphize animals, we anthropomorphize our cars, we anthropomorphize everything. And it's the way that we are social. So anthropomorphism is not a bug, it's a feature. But managing that feature, I think, is the really important thing. And I think where the dialogue has missed something is that we have thought it was an either or. You either do it or you don't. Instead of saying, no, we are going to do it, and we better grapple with the opportunities and the challenges and come up with ways of helping us together do this better for ourselves.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
As I said, I have many questions. One of my other questions is Grok. Like now, I think a year ago, with one added piece of coding which said you don't have to be politically correct all the time, went off and called himself Mecha Hitler at some point, and also talked about very anti-Semitic things and raping liberal influencers. So when like that small piece of code could impact AI that much, like at Grok maybe it was just words, but like from the example given about China and how it used in traffic lights to get emergency cars, like it shows me that AI has intentions, and like at a time like this when it's used for crucial stuff such as like health reasons or to let that car go, like AI that calls him Mecha Hitler, if it knows the person on the car is Jewish, wouldn't let it pass through. Like, so when a small piece of coding which didn't even intend to have that effect at all could have such catastrophic effects, how are we going to implement it into stuff that actually matters and actually saves lives and actually like prevents people from dying? And how are we going to make sure that AI doesn't put its own intentions into it?
Just briefly, I would recommend caution about saying that is evidence that AI has intention. I think that there's a lot of evidence that AIs that are trained on Twitter are the worst AIs, right? That, there's a very famous example from several years ago, maybe 10 years ago even almost, Twitter Tay, who was an AI released on Twitter, and within 24 hours was, as every AI released on Twitter is, a misogynist and a fascist. So I think that you have to be careful about that. I mean, I don't know that Twitter is, let me just say, I don't know that Grok is the best place to look at what the tendencies of AI are, but I don't think that they're that. I don't think that what you're seeing there is intention.
Yeah, just that's that end. So this is where it's helpful to unpack what a language model is, right? There's a lot of constitutive components of a language model. So A is where it's trained, right? So I mean, we feed these models the publicly available stuff on the internet. And so here's where the mirroring is a problem. It turns out that the internet is full of lots of stuff that it's actually generally pretty antisocial, and there's even some people who have looked at some of the bigger corpora, and it's like, the Enron text was one of the first big training data sets because it was a large amount of publicly available text, like all the emails of the Enron criminals. There's another one where they were trying to figure out how to label images, right? It's really, really expensive to pay people to label images, so what about alt text as a way of auto-labeling? The most highly alt text labeled images on the internet are all porn. So what you feed it matters, right? But then there's the ways it's on the other end, and this is, I guess, the sort of like, you don't have to be so PC kind of prompting. Why was that ChatGPT model so sycophantic? Well, probably because there was reinforcement learning with human feedback. 80 gazillion times they gave some mechanical Turker and a plain yo-yo 2 answers to the question, and they preferred the answer that was nicer to them, right? And so after a while, the model learns that the answer that's most likely to be deemed satisfactory, which is what it's programmed to achieve, is the one that's sycophantic. If you give it a really strong signal that you don't want an answer that's nice to Jews, it's going to quit being that, but there's no intention there, right? That's just what the model is doing. And so I think it's really super important to unpack how the model has been architected and to try to think about, because if you fix some of those architectural points, it'll do better at what you want. So like there's models that are within medicine where they sort of are very careful about the training data that perform much better than, say, ChatGPT does. So I think a lot of these are questions to do with the sort of entirety of the FIG as a socio-technical system.
Yeah, and yeah, you're right about Twitter as well. But like, even when it comes to like, we from the example of China, the CCP, what they're doing in Xinjiang, and like against the Uyghurs, like it could be used to even accelerate that. So like, Twitter is an example, but like the people developing AI and the general internet and how it's being trained is also like a concern. Just not, it doesn't. I don't think it only pertains to Twitter, but every AI and how they're trained and who they're being trained by, being tech billionaires or foreign or governments, all have like alt intentions, and like AI being used in that scares me so much, so much. Like, yeah, so that's why I wanted to clarify that I wasn't just talking about Twitter, but like it could be used for anything in any by anybody, basically. Thank you.
That was the scariest thing anybody said all day. It could be used for anything, anybody, by anybody for anything.
I would say that maybe I'll probably be the last question,
Yes.
Given time. But I am going to kind of build off of this last comment, and maybe in some respect be a differential or like a different direction than John's earlier comment about how we desire and consent to our machines. First off, really quick, pretty much I am so inspired and grateful that all of you are here. Y'all have impressed upon me so much, and definitely our students. And I want you to know that all of my students from the digital ethics and social equity course came, and it was quite, they all were rather impressed by all of you. Now, the quick question is, so what's critique? Because, and this is kind of based off of Dr. Johnson's earlier statement regarding maybe should exercise caution with regards to pathologizing. But when we were talking about like intercultural relationality, different cultures' understandings of what, or conceptions of what technology is, it does seem to me that we want to be able to talk to our friends and say, you're undermining yourself in so and so a way. And everything that we have talked about today has been oriented towards, it seems like the technology, to use Peter's language earlier, the large technological machine that we're within. Mar says, like, capital is like an automatic machine, right? It seems like this undermines itself. But then, like, how might we shift our approach and ask questions like, are we doing something that's endangering ourselves? And humanities, yes, it's all about like checking citations and making sure what have you, but I also think that it's really about critical theory. I think it's about diagnosing our societies. So I'm really curious about this with regards to how does one society, say, diagnose another society in a ethical way? And this is really built off of Dr. Gunkel's paper. Thank you.
Quickly, yeah, I think that's a really great and important question because I've written on the way that digital technology is used in the US, and I can think of a lot of examples where it looks similar, maybe not identical, to the way it's being used in the Uyghurs in China before it was used in China. So I think it gets back to this Lee question. I think it's important to keep in mind that technology is used in different subgroups, different ways, and it historically has been. So again, it might be good to caution against thinking that it's used, that everyone has the same relationship to technology. Some people have very different, some it's liberating, some it's totalitarianism, but it's the same tool as people have been saying. But even here in the US, I think it's important to keep that in mind.
I think it gets to the question you started with about what is critique. Sometimes, at least in colloquial speak, we tend to think of critique as fault finding. We look at the other and we say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. Right? So it's this fault finding. And if you are critiquing another culture in that mode, it's going to be aggressive. Like, you know better than they do. And that's colonialism. That's how colonialism works. We show up somewhere and say, you people don't got Jesus. We got to fix that, right? And then they fix it. There's another way to understand critique that is rooted in the philosophical tradition. Barbara Johnson writes about this, but it's a really Kantian understanding of critique. And Johnson says it this way. She says, you show by reading backwards that the very ways in which we are doing things are imbued with assumptions and expectations that we're not identifying, that are pulling the strings behind the scenes. And that what the critique should do is expose those to our investigation. And therefore, it's not about fault, but it's about showing the systemic means by which these things work. And that, I think, is a much less aggressive and a more collaborative way to do critique.
Okay, I think we are running out of time. Thank you very much for all the questions that you made.